The circle of affection, love, and admiration for Brenda Phipps is immensely wide, and it stretches overseas to her family and her friends in the UK and Paris. It's often said that you can either be in this life an Anglophile or a Francophile, you can't be both. And so this is one of the countless ways that Brenda Phipps defied cliché. When I came to the New Yorker in 1992, I knew absolutely no one except for Tina, with whom I had exactly one lunch. I barely knew when to show up on what day, so I arrived on Columbus Day, as it was once called, and no one was there to save me, and there was just one assistant there who had an immensely long, Christ-like beard. My door was locked. I didn't know how to get into it, and I was really raring to go. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was raring to go. The person with the Christ-like beard that I'm recalling, by the way, is not Brenda Phipps.
I wonder where you were going.
It was someone else. And I shyly told him that the office I had was locked, and could he open it for me? And he nodded. Then he went into the adjacent office, which was opened the window, climbed out on the ledge. We were on the 19th floor. He crawled along the ledge like Spider-Man, opened the window to what was my office, climbed in, and opened the door. My first thought was that I was going to like working at the New Yorker magazine. People seemed quite dedicated to their work, but not as dedicated as Brenda Phipps. And I certainly got to know Brenda over the first 5 years of my time there while Tina was editor. She was 6 years, right? She was very funny, very warm, very serious, and clearly the crucial person in running the New Yorker. Then an odd thing happened. I inherited the job that Tina had, and with it some immense good fortune. I had not the slightest clue how to do this job at all, and were it not for the grace, the patience, and wisdom of some dear colleagues, Pam, Dorothy, Henry, and many more who are in this room, that first year, or 5 years, would have been even uglier than they were. And no one at the New Yorker showed me more grace, patience, and wisdom than Brenda, who happily had agreed to stay on and work together with me. And when I say work together rather than worked for, that's not some nicety or political etiquette. It was very much the case. Brenda not only schooled me in countless details of doing the work at hand, she was a vigilant friend. And to me, to Esther, to Alex and Noah, and soon to Natasha. In fact, not only did Alex and Noah adore her, so too, in her way, did Natasha. And whenever we had gatherings here, book parties and the like, the only guest allowed to wander into that back room to sit a while with Natasha was Brenda Phipps. Like all of us, Natasha sensed in Brenda someone of infinite generosity. Brenda was a reader, a listener, a cosmopolitan, and a spiritual person. No one who came to know her failed to see the depth in her selflessness, and her self-possession, as well as her kindness. When she would make a trip to Paris or the UK, she would return, and instead of talking about the food or the sights or anything so banal, she would talk about her family and her friends whom she loved and whom she worried about endlessly. Not that she was indiscriminate in her affections, which is why you thought you had really achieved something in life, something of value, if Brenda Phipps thought well of you. Brenda was infinitely generous to everyone in her life, though I don't think I am alone in having wanted more for her. I would have wanted life to be more generous to her. In a careful, wary, but I hope unmistakable way, I wish love and companionship for her even more than she had. And yet she was uncomplaining. Complaint for her, I think, lacked a certain dignity, a quality that she had as much as anyone that I've ever known. Brenda, I think, struck some of her friends as exquisitely old-fashioned. She did not like to hear me curse, and I cursed like a sailor. I stopped cursing in her presence. She treated people with impeccable respect and justly expected the same from them. She loved to laugh. She loved to have a drink now and then. She liked to eat well, though never excessively. Life was hardly easy for her. Who was it easy for? But she kept at it no matter the obstacle or the illness. I had the feeling that Brenda, who loved to go to Abyssinian Baptist, would not mind if I ended with scripture, a passage from Romans that seems to get at her clear view of things. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another. Outdo one another in showing honor. So yes, Brenda might have yearned for more at times, and we for her, but she always protested that her family and her friends, you in this room and you in rooms well beyond, were enough for her. How lucky we were to have lived among her, around her, and on the same earth. Oleha HaShalom. May she rest in peace.
As you know, my aunt, she didn't like fuss, but she did know how to enjoy her life to the fullest. She loved to travel. She enjoyed the various arts. She was a great cook, and she loved entertaining. And when she wasn't entertaining, she enjoyed her quiet time. My aunt was fun. She loved to dance. And I recall many years ago when the electric slide was the most popular dance. She taught me the steps. And we would spend Sundays while she's cooking, dancing the electric slide. Those were the fun moments. As I look and at everyone here remembering my aunt, I find peace in knowing that she touched your lives as you touched her heart in some point in her life. She will live on in all your memories. May she rest in peace, my dear Aunt Brenda. You will be forever in our hearts. Thank you.
She was such a steadfast anchor in my family's life. This will be the first Christmas in over 35 years that there's going to be no pile of beautifully wrapped little gifts, chosen with care, that Brenda left and we would put under the tree. She first entered our lives after Harry precipitously left the Times in 1982 after his fight with Rupert Murdoch and his life was in disarray. For the past 3 years, Brenda had been the right hand of his best friend Bernard Donahue, who ran Prime Minister Harold Wilson's Economic Policy Unit at Downing Street. It was part of Brenda's modesty that people never really knew this period of her life about how she worked at the heart of Downing Street. She was actually the first black administrative assistant in the civil service to be assigned to a figure as senior as Bernard Donahue. Her job was to support the unit's 10 economists, 9 men and 1 woman, and mostly her job was to negotiate with the often obstructive civil service bureaucracy, who were deeply suspicious of the unit's influence as a rival sphere of influence to the Treasury. Any doubts that Bernard had that she could handle such a politically treacherous role were almost immediately dispelled by her preternatural calm and efficiency. She was perhaps one of the last administrative assistants who could actually take accurate notes in rapid shorthand. And her refusal was remarkable, to be drawn into any internecine departmental warfare. She had this amazing lack of political she didn't care about politics, Brenda. So when she came to work for Harry, she proceeded to bring order to his ballooning post-Times portfolio of projects and board positions. She soon proved as brilliant with him as with me at not actually sending some of the more reckless letters that he dictated, which she later quietly suggested he might care to give a second thought. He absolutely adored her. It was Brenda's intelligence, judgment, and integrity that I most quickly came to value at Vanity Fair. As with Harry, she joined me at a moment of chaos, as a matter of fact. In 1989, I discovered that my long-time, much-trusted personal assistant was actually an Anna Sorokin-esque sociopath. It turned out that for the preceding 3 years, she had been riding around town on my Condé Nast Manhattan limousine account. Oh, the glory days. Hosting friends to lunch at the Four Seasons, buying charming gifts for herself on my corporate Amex card, and the pièce de résistance that finally busted her, throwing a 40th birthday party for herself and 20 friends with a Brigadoon theme in a private room. Seriously, this actually happened. I will never forget my call with the caterer when I queried the Brigadoon party on the bill. You remember, the caterer said, that evening when we created the Scottish mist for the cocktail. So, let's just say I had some trust issues after that. And Harry said, you call Brenda Phipps. Well, Brenda was living in Paris at that time, and I never thought that she'd move from the city that she loved so much to the clamorous, strange world of New York City. But like Mary Poppins, she descended by umbrella into my outer office at 350 Madison Avenue, and all was calm, all was peace, all was secure in the deep vault of her absolute, trustworthy discretion. The rest, as we all know, is history. In the turmoil of those early days at the New Yorker, knowing she had my back at all times was such a gift. She was so much more to me than my assistant. She was my conscience, my judgment gene, and also something I'll always bless her for, the custodian of my time with my children. Brenda was fiercely protective of promises I made as a mother to always be home at a certain time, and would coolly tell those who all demanded to get me on the phone that I had, quote, left for the day. Or she'd say to me, you've been out twice already this week, looking very stern, as I waffled over an invitation. Shall I just say that you're otherwise committed? I'll always be so grateful for that. And I know that Izzy and Georgie, who came to love her as their godmother, always will too. When David woke me up in London to tell me Brenda had passed, I lay awake for the rest of the night, thinking about her kindness, her truthfulness, her rare understanding of what it means to live an ethical life. And I pretended, as I still do, that she simply packed her Mary Poppins carpet bag and gone back to live in her beloved Paris. Goodbye, darling B.
Brenda was a Bajan by birth, an Englishwoman by upbringing, and a Frenchwoman and American woman by choice. If she had achieved nothing beyond these things, she would have lived a life that exceeded what was expected of her or demanded. When we were introduced by Tina Brown so long ago now, I recognized Brenda at once. She came from the same world my family came from, and it was that recognition that informed our friendship straight down the line. To say any more now would be to risk the kind of exposure Brenda was embarrassed by and questioned, and so as not to risk her displeasure, and thus be relegated to the deepest Brenda deep freeze, colder than the hounds of Iceland. I'll stop now, but not before saying I loved her and I loved those days.
When I got the job, I was pretty green to office life. I couldn't seem to make conference calls work for you. And you very calmly said that one day Barack Obama is going to call, and I need to not hang up on him. So one day, very early on, we were still at 4 Times Square. You said that you were going to do some writing and you would close the door, and I did know well enough by then that that meant my job was to turn away people and keep track of the queue until the door opened back up. 10 minutes later, a man in a baseball cap came by and asked if you were around. I explained that David was writing and he could come back later, and I felt pretty good about myself. Then all of a sudden, Brenda, whose office at 4 Times Square was tucked behind the other assistant's desk, so she must have x-rayed the wall to see exactly what was happening, came out and took this baseball-capped man by the elbow, which she liked to do, and said, actually, right this way. In goes the man, the door shuts again, and Brenda turns lovingly to me and whispers, that was Dave Eggers. And that too was Brenda Phipps. She knew everything, saw through everything, people, walls, BS, and she used it to help those around her rather than ever taking the credit. For Brenda, at work at least, the job came first. She expected the same level of precision of others that she expected of herself, but she never took it too seriously. And when I finally got the hang of the job, thanks in no small part to Brenda, she'd treat me to increasing amounts of in-jokes and stories. By the time she retired, we both had our roles down so well. We'd joke from morning to night, or we'd tell stories in French all day. Stories about the time Sidney Poitier asked her to dance. Or her time working for the Prime Minister, or the slippers in Paris that she tried to pass off as work shoes. And she'd sing, never too loudly, except for the one time when David came out and said, confused, "What's that noise?" "What's that noise?" then got incorporated into Brenda's repertoire. Our relationship gradually shifted from her being the best coworker to her also being a great friend. I'll never forget her epic brunches. You knew to clear not only the full day of a Brenda brunch, but also for the lighter weights among us the day after. And then after she retired, our relationship deepened even further, and she became something like a second mom. I'd help her update her apps and coordinate her French electricity appointments. And in exchange, she'd feed me the most exquisite meal, which she'd write off as so simple, just 3 ingredients. And she became the one I would call when I wanted advice. The place I grew up in Queens was so small that when I gave up my apartment in New York and would come back to the city for the holidays, it was her place that I'd always come to. It was perfect, even down to a bathrobe hanging in the guest closet. Brenda is and was a home for me in every sense. One second. The last time I saw her was this summer, in June. After years of waiting, she was finally able to make it back to France and to the place that had meant so much to her. It was her last morning in Paris, and my boyfriend and I walked to her apartment to sit and talk with her a while. That's when that photo was taken. I love that it captures her quintessential smirk. She, like with that wall at 4 Times Square, is looking straight through you two. We brought her bags down and loaded them into the cab and hugged her goodbye. That's also how I like to think of her, on a trip somewhere between France and the States, packed with everything she needs.